I got to spend some time dunking on the liberals and the Kamala Harris supporters. I have to do it. I have to do it. I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sorry to sound like Trump. I have to do it. I'm so sorry. But yeah. Anyways, there were we. You remember we made that Alan Lichtman video, the 13 Keys video. That was one of our most disliked video, I think. Or it got a lot of views, but a lot of people hit the dislike button, and a lot of people commented down below on why we're stupid and why we're wrong. And it appears that we were not the ones that were wrong; we were the ones that were right. And there were a lot of people that wrote like a whole like wall, a whole like Trump border wall full of text. Uh, Claiming why they knew better than us and why Alan Lichtman knew better than us, and who are we to question the professor and stuff like that, right? So we'll go through some of those comments, and then there's also maybe a last part of the story that we'll reveal later. But yeah, anyways, let me read you one of the wall comments of this guy named Hyper Luigi 37, who commented on our Alan Lichtman video. So for those of you who missed that video, let me just quickly summarize. So basically, Alan Lichtman, he's a professor. He made the system called the 13 Keys, and apparently it's been accurate the last like 10 out of 10 times, but apparently not this time, right? Because he was wrong this time. But before the election, he predicted that Kamala Harris was going to win, and then we went through his keys, his 13 keys, and we did the same kind of determinations and used the definitions that he provided, and we concluded that Trump was going to win. And then a bunch of people told us, no, you're wrong. Alan Lichtman is the inventor of the system. You're using his own system against him. You can't do that. He knows best. Kamala is going to win, and look what happened, right? So let's go through what Hyper Luigi said, right? So he said, the mistakes that you made here are all that you used are Wikipedia definitions, which are incomplete and only give basic descriptions of their keys and not their criteria, and not all of their criteria. So social unrest, Lichtman stresses that this is a very high bar for a key. It is not sporadic protest. It requires sustained, consistent riots that threaten the stability of the country. The 2020 BLM riots were in all 50 state capitals and lasted for months. It was very clear. The 1968 is also another example of a time that met this criteria. If you had to say that there is some social unrest, then that is not enough. You also questioned the scandal key, although you didn't officially rate this as false. And he had also mentioned that this key requires a deal with the president directly, not anybody else. Hunter Biden is not enough to flip the key, which, by the way, I didn't say that it flipped the key, right? So I actually gave this one in favor of Kamala for the record. So yeah, this one was not one of the criteria that I evaluated. But yeah, anyways, the charisma key also has a very high specific bar. Trump does not receive the charismatic label because it requires significant recognition across the aisle and is also thoroughly inspirational to everyone on both sides. Trump is not inspirational, nor does he have any wide Democrat recognition for popularity. He only appeals to a narrow base. It is important to note that these key definitions are not his opinion. He tested dozens of definitions, but none of these definitions create a strong predictive power. He's a political scientist, not like the polls and dollars, but in the way that all his keys focus on accuracy above anything else. If you change any key, then the record of accurate prediction breaks. Is based on historical precedent, so it does not change. I would believe in this system, even if it predicts Trump in 2028 or any other politicians that I don't like. Donald Trump didn't win the 2016 election because of his charisma, at least according to the keys. A combination of missed governing keys during Obama's second term and Hillary's unpopularity, shown by her battle with Bernie and her contested nomination, cost the Democrats the race. According to Lichtman, it wasn't a Democratic year from the start. So, yeah, I mean, some of what he said, I guess I would maybe even agree with, but I think a lot of what this person mentioned is just completely inaccurate. But let's move on. There are some that just, didn't provide nearly as detailed of a reason. At least I appreciate Mr. Hyper Luigi for responding with a detailed answer and not just calling us stupid, right? But some people are like, oh, you're just wrong. The keys are objective. You can't give your own interpretations. That's not how it works. And then there's people that are like, you guys need to give it a rest. The professor knows what he's talking about. Trust in the professor. You guys sound like you want Trump back in the White House. No thanks, crazy Trump. One could say that there is, and then this person says one could say that there is social unrest in Harris's favor due to abortion bans, which I feel like cancels that key out. And again, like, people want to talk about the keys being objective. You can't just pick and choose like which social unrest is in your favor and say that there is social unrest, but it's actually social unrest in favor of Harris. So that's why it's that key, it goes in favor of Harris. Like, people keep changing the rules, right? So this is what I have to say to that, and maybe we'll discuss the reasons specifically on what went wrong with Lichtman's predictions. But yeah, I mean, there's a second part of the story, so maybe this is actually a good break point where I want to flip it back to you guys, where if you guys want to comment on Lichtman's 13 keys and maybe respond to some of these comments, especially Mr. Luigi here, who gave us at least a detailed answer on why he thought we were wrong, and it turns out we were right. But where did Lichtman, where did Mr. Luigi go wrong? So take it away, guys.
So I think that if I recall correctly, my main point was essentially that it was much closer than I think Lichtman was giving credit for, and I think that to Hyper Luigi's point, maybe these are higher bars than maybe Alan is using a higher bar, but I do question if Alan's high bars for some of these are too high, for example, with the charisma one, or if there needs to be an additional weighting placed to, a uncharismatic incumbent leader. That's the right term, right? Like Kamala is the incumbent, right? Yeah. Because I do feel like I think the comparison between the two was a really large contributing factor to Trump's victory. And if I recall correctly, there was I was saying that I think that there was only the charisma one because I was giving the two political ones to Trump also, like the no military victory and no whatever the other one was that was related to that at the time when we recorded that video were undetermined.
Military failure and a military victory, right? So if there was a military victory, then it goes the key goes in favor of the incumbent, right? And if there was no major military failure, then it also goes towards the incumbent. But we argued, I think you argued this as well, that both of those keys actually went in favor of Trump because the military failure one was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was one of the most embarrassing things for America in like a really long time. I don't know how like Lichtman can ignore that one. And then there was the military success one, where we argued that there was no major military success, but Lichtman was, I think, trying to argue that the Ukraine war was a military success, which we heavily disagree with. So maybe you want to elaborate on that one, Tristan?
Yeah, that's where I was going with this. Was that one where he gave after the show, he gave them he concluded that was a victory for Biden / Kamala. And it's interesting because the way he phrases a lot of these things, he's like, Biden, it's a victory for Biden, but the runner is Kamala, right? So I know that Biden and Kamala are, president, VP, but I feel like to the public perception, having it kind of Biden versus Kamala, I feel like most of this is not necessarily going to be perceived as Kamala. It's going to be perceived as Biden more so. So even if there was a particular proof that they had some kind of victory there, I feel like it would be more to Biden's credit, not to Kamala's at that point. And so on that front, and then on that front, like I don't really think that qualifies as a victory. There's an ongoing conflict in Ukraine that has not concluded. And honestly, other countries were very engaged in supporting Ukraine in their efforts, with honestly much louder voices than Biden and Kamala a lot of the time. You know, for example, like the UK and such were very gung ho for supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression. So at that point, I find it really hard to say that this is going to be a key in favor of Biden or Biden/Kamala, because it just doesn't. I don't feel like there was sufficiently large of a victory. It's not like they won the Gulf War or something, or a major conflict, or the Korean War, or like figured out one of the many Middle East wars. Like they had two wars occur in this time frame, and neither of them are concluded at the end of the two major conflicts. There's probably some other ones that I'm missing, but two major conflicts occurred, and there is no sign of either of them ending anytime soon under Biden and Kamala. So I feel like giving them a victory, giving them the key on that one was extremely weak to me. There was not a strong argument there.
And then, sorry to cut you off. I think that one is not only, I think you're even giving Alan Lichtman too much credit for that one, even with what you said, because let's just say the withdrawal from Afghanistan didn't exist. Even in that case, I would say that the Ukraine war should be a key that goes in favor of Trump. Like, it's a failure. It fits the definition of the military failure one, which favors Trump. And the reason why I say that is because if you just look at a map of what the situation in Ukraine right now is, 20% of Ukraine's land is occupied by Russia. And I don't know how you can call that a victory. Like, yes, Ukraine still exists, but it lost a fifth of its land to Russia. And yes, Russia is weakened, but who controls a fifth of Ukraine, right? Like, you can't get around that, right? So you can't lose. You can't have an ally that you support, that you say that you're on the winning side, when your ally has a fifth of their land in the hands of the enemy, right? So despite Russia losing a lot of troops, and losing a lot of equipment, and losing, the tide is still in their favor, and they're the ones that are on the attack still to this day. And every day I still check the Ukraine war map sometimes, and I'm seeing a lot more Russia capturing Ukraine's land, like capturing even more land than Ukraine is able to get back, despite all the help and all the money that NATO has given Ukraine, right? So I would say that that's a failure, because the American people are sitting at home struggling with their grocery bills. And when they turn on the news, all they see is Biden gives Ukraine another $100 billion, another $50 billion, right? Like, you hear about this every few months. They give Ukraine another $50 billion, and Israel too, for that matter. But yeah, like, it's not a good look, right? And when you're giving a country so much money and they're not even winning, and they're getting more land taken away from them day by day. And it's just, whatever they're doing, it's not working. So I would actually classify the Ukraine war as the opposite of what Lichtman is. Not only should it not be a key in favor of Kamala Harris and Biden, it should be a key in favor of Trump, on top of the Afghanistan withdrawal. So you actually have two things that could, like, if I could give two keys to Trump in that one, I would. But I guess that's not allowed in the rules, and that's fine. But I don't even have to do that. And then Trump already has more than enough keys to win. So yeah, it's just I think it was just totally off, and what he said just objectively didn't make sense. Yeah, Tristan, you want to continue? Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, like, I think that I had him at 5 keys. I think that 5 keys was pretty fair. Prior to the debate on whether or not he's charismatic enough to get the charismatic key. And to me, I don't see how that can't be to some degree opinion based, even if you're going off of the opinions of a polled population. That is still going to be an opinion from those people. So I don't see how you can quantify how charismatic someone is sufficiently to the point where you can definitively say that Trump wasn't charismatic enough to get that key. And that's kind of and that key is really all that it takes to flip the script on my assessment. And that's assuming that that's without re-examining any of the other keys. And that was really where I was hammering on, because that's why I thought it would be close, was because I thought that it really comes down to is Trump charismatic enough to flip the key, right? Because if he isn't, presumably it would be a Kamala victory, but if he is, presumably it's a Trump victory. And I think in my opinion, that is the key that probably would have resulted in his victory if we were, because to me, I think the military one, I think Lichtman's argument on that one was extremely weak. So I just think that one is clearly flipped in my mind, like it's clearly for Trump. It's just the charismatic one, I think there's an argument to be made there whether or not he's charismatic, because I know he doesn't appeal to a lot of people. He doesn't particularly appeal to me, but I think that there are definitely people who he does appeal to. So it's like, at what level is that sufficient charisma that he can tip the scale and be considered charismatic enough to get that key? And I think if we're looking at the keys in that perspective, I think that it's pretty clear to me that I think, for at least my assessment, that Trump had flipped that key. I think probably with the Joe Rogan interview and somewhere along the line there, I think that's when he convinced the population that he was charismatic enough to justify that key flipping, or not that the general public was actively sitting there with the 13 keys open, checking them off, like, I liked what he said on the Joe Rogan show. I think he's charismatic enough. But you know what I'm saying. And just one more thing, just to the guy who said that the keys are objective and I can't give your own interpretations of the keys. That's not how it works. I'm sorry. You can give your own interpretation about just about anything. Just saying, it is freedom of speech. I can say what I want. It doesn't have to be true. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. You can disagree wholeheartedly, but I can confidently go online and say that my assessment, Alan Lichtman, with all the research and all the degrees he has, is wrong. You can look at that and go, well, you don't have all his degrees and you are not as well versed in this, so you are wrong, and referring to me, and that is a perfectly fine assessment. But I can and I will provide my own interpretation of the keys based on my understanding and my analysis of the situation, and it is my right to do so. And whether or not the keys are objective or not, in my opinion, this is, I took political science classes back in university. A lot of that stuff is open to interpretation in general. And the keys are also open to interpretation. I don't know about you, but when I'm assessing a military action and its success, unless it is clearly a victory or clearly a defeat, I have to now figure out where it fits on the victory and defeat in the middle ground there. And, based on, as we heard from Andy, based on his assessment, the Ukraine stuff was a defeat. But based on Alan's, it's a victory. So clearly there is room for multiple perspectives on this topic, despite there being theoretically a similar degree of information provided. So from my perspective, I'm just going to say that I can interpret whatever I want. And I appreciate the comment, though. That's I like the engagement.
Yeah, I don't know why people get so pigeonholed into this idea that because Alan Lichtman invented the 13 keys, then then he has to be right 100% of the time in interpreting his own keys. Like, we don't do that for anything else, right? It's like, do we ask the ghost of Steve Jobs for permission on what the next iPhone should be? Like when we like improve upon the iPhone and make a new generation, right? Like, or do we ask, like, do we always have to ask the inventor of something what they think is the best thing to do if we're trying to, you know, make a new version of their invention or something like that, right? So it's just, I don't have to, like, we don't have to ask for permission to use the 13 keys from Alan Lichtman. And it doesn't mean that just because he invented them, it doesn't mean that he's always going to be right. And you know what Mr. Luigi was saying, it's important to know that these definitions are not his opinion. Yes, they are. They're totally his opinion, right? And like it or not, a lot of this stuff, like the 13 keys, some of them were objective, like the, you know, data points about the economics. And even for that, I think there's some room for debate where it's like, is the official numbers really representative of what's happening on the ground? But I actually gave those ones to Kamala Harris just because I didn't want to debate people on it, because, you know, there is the official numbers saying that at least on paper the economy is doing fine. And I think that maybe the reason why she lost in such a spectacular fashion was because the official numbers were not reflective either of what's going on the ground. So there's some subjectivity to there as well. But even if we pretend that those are the objective ones, like the charisma one, for instance, like that's totally subjective, as what Tristan said earlier. And like no social unrest, like you say that the bar is really high. Well, again, like, it's a little bit subjective, right? So if the BLM riots were social unrest, well, I can say that there's like a lot of social unrest with the Israel Gaza war that's happening, that is affecting a lot of people in America too, because America, it's a very diverse country. There's a lot of Jewish people, and there's a lot of Arab people, and, you know, Muslim people. So if you just look at the statistics of what happened after the October 7th, the Israel Gaza war started, the rates of like anti-Semitism and anti like Muslim sentiment, they both went up drastically, right? So that's social unrest. And there were like a bunch of pro-Palestinian protesters that actually broke into the Capitol building. I'm not sure if you guys remember that. And like the media try to bury it because it's like, you know, another Jan 6, but it's like from people that they're trying to court, right? Because pro-Palestinian people are mostly left-leaning, or at least the theory is. I don't know for sure, but that's what the kind of overall consensus is. And, you know, they want to illustrate Trump supporters in a negative light, so they're making all this stuff, and they're saying all this stuff about Jan 6, but then when the pro-Palestinian people do it and they break into the Capitol and hold up Palestinian flags and, like, you know, saying that blood is on your hands for genocide, like the media tries to like bury that story, right? But you know, thank God for X, because thank Elon for X, because we can that stuff gets posted, right? And then there's also, like, you know, during that protest, I believe they also took down some of the American flags that were around the Capitol building or in Washington, D.C. in general. And they burned the American flags and then replaced them with Palestinian flags. Like, imagine that happening on in the capital of your nation, right? So, you know, again, I don't want to get into this thing about, like, I'm not like pro-Israel or anti-Palestine or anything like that, but I'm just saying, right? It's social unrest, and I don't support people being you know, and racist towards Muslims, and I don't support people being racist against Jews. Like, I think we should all get along. But the fact is, after this war started, there's a lot of hate coming from both sides and being lobbed at each other, and that's I think that clears the bar for social unrest. But again, if you want to debate on that, even if we toss that one to Harris, as you said, Tristan, the charisma one, and then the military failure ones, and then there were a few more that even Lichtman agreed with me on. That puts 6 keys towards Trump, which is enough to predict a Trump victory. So I think the issue was that Lichtman stopped following his own rules, and he was kind of, if you think about it this way, he was kind of right and wrong at the same time. Like his system works. Like the 13 keys, like people are making fun of it right now and trashing it, but it actually works. But it only works if you're honest about yourself. And I don't know what happened to Lichtman, and maybe he got, pulled further to the left and pulled into an echo chamber, right? So my theory was that, he only talks to his professor friends and they're all super anti-Trump and never Trumpers. And that's why he thinks that there's no room for interpretation on the charisma one. And Trump absolutely cannot convince anyone to come to his side. And that's just blatantly untrue, right? If you just look at the exit polls, a lot of people were first-time voters. And a lot of people were first-time Trump voters, and a lot of people were first-time voters in general that voted for Trump. So the idea that he can't pull anybody to his side, that's just blatantly false. And if Lichtman had followed his own rules, he would be like 11 for 11 now, or however many his record is. But it's his first miss in decades. So yeah, Tristan.
Yeah. Honestly, even if he just given the military one to Trump and then just decided that Trump wasn't charismatic enough and still called for a Kamala victory, I feel like it would be less of like a disconnect, because I feel like you could be like, well, I guess the population found him more charismatic than I did, or than my assessment was. But I feel like because he gave the military one, which I just feel like was so clearly not sufficient in my perspective for Kamala's side, I just feel like he put himself in a spot where he has no real, like he kind of seemed to be wanting a result a little bit, and maybe let that cloud his judgment on it, because I just feel like the military one, I can't really see that one at all. It just doesn't really jive. And I kind of feel like even reading it on his page, it did kind of feel like he was grasping at straws with that one. Whereas the other ones, I feel like he was much more confident on. But then if he had given the military one, then it all comes down to whether or not Trump is charismatic. And at that point, it's basically just an opinion piece, right? Like it's like just Alan Lichtman's opinion featuring maybe some polling that asked people if they thought he was charismatic. And, and if we want to take into perspective that, we also have to remember that Trump was campaigning all the way up until the election. Someone who didn't find him charismatic at the beginning of his, may have found him charismatic at the end. So how would you accurately assess whether or not he is charismatic enough to flip the key, right? That's just kind of what I'm saying. And so if he had gotten it to the point where it's five for Trump, the rest for Kamala, with that charisma one kind of in the middle, I could kind of see it better. Whereas I feel like because he went with the military ones, it's just like not very compelling for me. Right.
Makes sense. And yeah, if you're ready, why don't we move on to the last part of the story? Just another statistic, I think, to maybe back up to what I was saying about the social unrest between, maybe what Jews think of the Israel-Palestine conflict and what Muslims think, or Arab Americans think of the conflict. So this is a data point that I got on election night from the Dearborn, Michigan district, which is the heavy Muslim population district in America. I think this is like the most concentrated Muslim population in America. And in that district, Trump won 45% of the vote, and actually the Green Party is the one that came in second, with Jill Stein from the Green Party winning 33% of the votes. This is only on election day, so this doesn't include the early voting. So I don't know what that looks like, but just looking at the data from election day, just looking at this one data point, it tells the big story, right? It's that Muslims are not happy with the way that the Biden administration is handling the Israel-Gaza conflict. And I know what you said about both major parties in the United States being very supportive of Israel, and that might not jive well with a lot of Arab Americans as well, which is why you see that a lot of them chose to vote for Jill Stein of the Green Party, because the Green Party has come out very pro-Palestine as the sort of anti-Israel pro-Palestine party. But even then, some Arab Americans are clearly choosing Trump over Harris, and if not Trump, then they choose Jill Stein. So no matter which way you look at it, is that the Arab population in America has very fast, it has abandoned the Democratic Party in a very dramatic and fast way, because of dissatisfaction, clear dissatisfaction of the way that they're prosecuting these geopolitical conflicts. So that's just an interesting data point to back up what I said earlier.